Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. I've got 6 o'clock on my end, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Holly Grant. I work with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department's Coastal Fisheries Division, and I'm going to be facilitating our webinar here this evening. Before we get started, I do just have a few reminders that I want to go over really quickly. Your cameras, microphones, and chat, all of that is going to be disabled during the webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use that Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. We are going to be doing questions at the end of the presentation today, but please feel free to use that Q&A throughout the webinar if you have a question at any point. If you would like to provide comments about the proposal being presented tonight, you must submit your comments through our online portal. We are not going to be accepting any comments through Zoom here tonight. Tomorrow, you will receive an email from Zoom with contact information if you have any additional questions. You will also be receiving a link to our YouTube page where you will be able to find the recording of this webinar this evening, and again, that link to our comment page. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter for the evening. Go for it, Zach.
Okay, thank you, Holly. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Can you see that, Holly? Okay. Well, thank you all.
Sorry.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight. My name is Zach Olson. I'm the Ayres Bays Ecosystem Leader for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And tonight we're here to talk about a proposed closure of Carlos, Mesquite, and Ayres Bay to oyster harvest. Before we jump into it, I just want to give a quick order of operations for this evening. We're going to start with just a presentation regarding the proposal that's on the table tonight. After that presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit more, pretty much mirroring what Holly said about how you can submit public comment if you're wanting to do so. And then we are going to have a time period where we're going to be entertaining some questions. And I want to be clear that we're only going to be entertaining questions that are aimed at clarifying the proposal that's on the table tonight. So only questions that are relevant to clarifying that proposal tonight. Before we get going with the presentation tonight, I just want to acknowledge those individuals, Parks and Wildlife staff that are sitting on our panel tonight. These folks are present to help answer any questions if necessary during the question and answer portion of our proposal. We have Holly Grant, who's going to be just facilitating the meeting for us tonight. Emma Clarkson, who is the director of the Ecosystem Resources Program with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Tiffany Hopper is our Science and Policy Director for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department Coastal Fisheries Division. Dacus Giesland is our Coastal Fisheries Division Deputy Director. Perry Trial is the Lower Coast Regional Director for the Management Resources Branch. Kelly Kowal is the Upper Coast Regional Director for the Management Resources Branch. And Christine Jensen is the Ecosystem Leader for the Galveston Bay Ecosystem. Like I said, my name is Zach Olson. I'm the Ayres Bay Ecosystem Leader for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. So let's go ahead and jump in to the presentation for tonight. And again, this is for a proposed closure of Carlos, Mesquite, and Ayres Bay to oyster harvest. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is a map of the proposed closure area. I'll show another map toward the end of the presentation tonight that kind of shows the proposed boundaries relative to some of the shellfish harvest areas in the region. But what I'm showing here, the red outline, is the proposed closure area of Carlos, Mesquite, and Ayres Bay. And some of those other colors you're seeing on the map are the various habitat types in and around this proposed closure area. So the black is the oyster habitat in that area. The dark green is salt marsh, and light green is seagrass. And this is really relevant to the reason for this proposed closure. So the reasoning behind this is really just the ecologically important oyster reef that we find in this Carlos, Mesquite, and Ayres Bay area. So what we mean by ecologically important oyster reef is that the oyster reef in this area consists of deep water oyster reef, shallow water oyster reef, both intertidal, kind of near the bay system fringes, but also out in the center of that bay system. And this oyster reef is interspersed with a variety of other habitat types that you saw on that map previously. previously, salt marsh and seagrass. And it's this diversity of habitat types on the estuarine landscape that really makes this some incredibly valuable nursery habitat for a number of organisms that use our estuaries for nursery habitat, such as blue crabs, such as red drum. The proximity of this area to the Cedar Bayou tidal pass also brings a lot of nursery habitat value. There's a number of organisms that are spawned in the Gulf of Mexico and then move in through a fairly limited number of tidal passes to the estuary for nursery habitat. So that proximity to that tidal pass makes this very valuable as well. In addition, it's the fact that that oyster reef is interspersed with those other habitat types really results in that oyster reef providing some protection from erosion for those other habitat types as well, for that salt marsh, for that seagrass. And kind of all of these things in general that value as nursery habitat really result in this area having a lot of potential as a larval sourcing area for the surrounding areas. And this isn't just oysters for larval sourcing of oysters, but also for some of those other estuarine species that we previously mentioned, blue crabs and red drum. Now, the importance of this proposal recently came about because of the increased harvest pressure we've been seeing in this area, and we'll talk more about that here in a couple minutes. Up until the last couple of years, we've really not seen a lot of harvest pressure in this area, and so it essentially was, for all intents and purposes, a protected area. But now that we're seeing increased pressure in this area, we found that it's necessary to propose that it be closed to oyster harvest. So there is precedence for this for proposed closures such as this. In 2017, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department closed 6 secondary or minor bays to oyster harvest, including Christmas Bay, Karankawa Bay, Powderhorn Lake, Hines Bay, St. Charles Bay, and South Bay. So over the next couple slides, what we're going to be looking at is data coming from a couple of different sources. The first couple slides, we're going to be looking at commercial oyster harvest landings and effort. And then we're going to transition a little bit to relative abundance of oysters from a couple of Parks and Wildlife's different sampling programs. So this first plot you're looking at here is commercial oyster harvest, that is landings, with total sacks given on the y-axis and year given on the x-axis, that is license year from 2008 to license year 2022. And I do want to highlight the fact that we're just going to be showing Mesquite Bay here. Mesquite Bay is kind of the central portion of that proposed closure, and Mesquite Bay is its own harvest area. For those of you familiar with that system, it's TX28. The Carlos Bay and Ayres Bay portions of this proposed closure area are part of a larger harvest areas, that is TX29 to the south and TX25 to the north. And so it's a little bit more difficult to get at the exact landings coming from those subsections, though we do attempt to estimate that based on the relative abundance of oyster reef in this area in the proposal that you can find on our website. But for the purposes of the presentation tonight, we're going to be looking primarily at Mesquite Bay with regards to harvest. So what you see here is kind of in some of the more recent years of harvest, namely 2017, and then again in 2022, we just see these increases in commercial oyster harvest for this area. Keep in mind that 2022, even though it was the second highest harvest on record, was a very short season for Mesquite Bay. It closed about the mid-December timeframe. This next slide here is total unique commercial oyster vessels fishing in the Mesquite Bay area from license year 2008 to 2022. That is total boats on the y-axis and license year on the x-axis. And again, what we're seeing here is kind of in the most recent years, that is 2017 really till present, 2022, we've just seen an increase in the amount of fishing effort in this area, with 2022, that is license year 2022, being our highest number of boats observed this far. So now we're going to transition to some of our relative oyster abundance data from 2 different sampling programs that Texas Parks and Wildlife conducts. This first graph we're looking at here is part of our routine oyster dredge sampling program. And the purpose of this program is really to get a bay-wide baseline abundance of oysters. So this isn't necessarily specific to one harvest area or another. We'll be looking at another sampling program in the next couple slides. It is specific to harvest area. But what we're looking at here is average market oyster relative abundance. That's market oysters or oysters greater than or equal to 3 inches, with dredge catch per hour on the y-axis and year on the x-axis. We have Mesquite Bay in the orange, Ayres Bay in the blue, Now, because this is a bay-wide sampling program, it doesn't cover all of the bays we're talking about tonight, but we will talk about Carlos Bay and some of our other sampling programs a little bit later on. So really what we're trying to show with this graph is just we see oyster abundance is incredibly variable across time in both Mesquite and Ayres Bay. We did see a record high abundance in 2020. 2021 dropped down a little bit from 2020. So just in general, incredibly variable, a little bit of increase in abundance we see in 2020 though, and then back down in 2021. So the next couple slides now, I want to focus us on the most recent license year, the most recent commercial oyster season. So what we're looking at here are sampling data from what's called our targeted oyster dredge sampling program. And the purpose of this program is to collect data that then helps us make decisions to open and close harvest areas to harvest of oysters. So you're seeing two lines on that graph. The line in the orange is the catch rate of market size oysters in TX28 or Mesquite Bay. And the blue line is the closure threshold. That is the threshold below which we drop for market oyster relative abundance before we'll close that area. So this time frame is, again, license year 2022 from just before the start of the commercial oyster season through the end of commercial oyster season for this particular harvest area. And what you kind of see at the beginning or just before the commercial oyster season started in September of 2021, we see that abundance was about 2,000 market oysters per hour. And we see that dropping over the course of the season to below that threshold of 400 market oysters per hour by that mid-December timeframe. So we'll kind of then move to TX25. This is a larger harvest area that includes the Ayres Bay portion of the proposed closure. Note that the scale on the y-axis is a little bit different. The number of market oysters in this area just prior to the commercial oyster season was lower than Mesquite Bay, sat at about 700 oysters per hour. That's relative abundance. And then into and over the course of that season, we see that dropped below the 400 market oyster catch rate in the early January 2022 timeframe. Lastly, we'll look at TX29. This is the harvest area that includes the Carlos Bay closure portion. Again, that orange line is the TX29 catch rate. That blue line is the closure threshold of 400 market oysters per hour. And we see again at the beginning of the commercial oyster season or just before the abundance of market size oysters or relative abundance set just below 2,000 market oysters per hour catch rate. And then over the course of the season, they dropped below that 400 market oyster catch rate about the mid to late January 2022 timeframe, and that's when that area closed. Okay, so what I want to show in this slide is just some specifics related to the oyster habitat in the Ayres, Mesquite, and Carlos Bay proposed closure area. So oyster habitat in the Ayres Bay proposed closure area is 578 acres. In the Mesquite Bay, that is 541 acres of oyster habitat. And in the Carlos Bay portion of that closure area, that's 1,010 acres of oyster habitat. So that's a total of 2,129 acres in the proposed closure area. That's 2.8% of coast-wide oyster habitat. And on average, that's about 9.6% of coast-wide landings. So about 9% of coast-wide landings comes from this proposed closure area. And so lastly, what I want to do is I just want to state clearly what the proposal is. So that is to prohibit oyster harvest in Ayres, Mesquite, and Carlos Bay. And the map you're seeing here is kind of a zoomed out version of the map you saw previously. So you can kind of see those surrounding harvest areas, TX29 to the south, TX25 to the north, and kind of where the proposed closure area sits relative to these other harvest areas. So that's the area outlined in red is the proposed closure area. You can see that all of TX28 is encompassed in that proposed closure area. The northern part of TX29 is encompassed in the proposed closure area, and the southern part of TX25 is encompassed in the proposed closure area. So I do want to make everybody aware that we are having some in-person public hearings related to this proposal later this week on Thursday, March 3rd from 6 to 8 p.m. We're having a hearing in Galveston, a hearing in Rockport, and a hearing in Port Lavaca. You can find information on those hearings on our website. And then the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting, for which we're collecting this public comment for, will take place on Thursday, March 24th at TPWD headquarters in Austin. So there's a number of ways you can give public comment. You can give it in person at one of our public hearings this coming Thursday, or you can give it online at the address shown, the web address shown on your screen. That QR code, if you scan that, that'll take you to our public comment portal as well. You can email us at the cfish@tpwd.texas.gov email address, or you can use the phone number shown on the screen. So I'm going to let this screen up just in case anybody needs to capture that information. And I do want to remind everyone that we're not taking public comment on the Zoom webinar tonight. If you want to provide public comment, you can do so at any of the ways that you see on your screen right now. But we will transition into a question answer portion for tonight. Now, I do just want to remind everybody again that we're only going to be answering questions that are aimed at clarifying the proposal tonight. So clarifying questions directly relevant to the proposal. So please limit your questions to those types of questions, those questions clarifying the proposal. That said, I'm going to turn this over to Emma Clarkson, who is going to run us through the Q&A section.
Thank you, Zach. And just as a reminder, if you guys have not used Zoom before, down at the bottom of your screen, if you move your cursor, a little banner should pop up and it has a Q&A, like little chat bubble in it. And if you just want to click on that, that should open a place where you can type in your Q&A answers and we will answer them, your Q&A questions, and we will answer them as they come through. We've had one come through so far. I'll just address it really quickly. It was one comment. I've heard from some people within the oyster industry that an oyster reef will die unless it is dredged. I do not agree with this broad statement. If this statement is true, by making this area a non-harvest sanctuary, if this statement is true, by making this area a non-harvest sanctuary, the oyster reefs will die due to lack of dredging. What is TPWD's stance or response on this type of statement? It's kind of it's a little bit of a clarifying question, so I'm just going to address it really quickly in that there is currently no published scientific literature that indicates that reefs die if they're not harvested, and so this isn't a concern that we have at this time regarding this proposal. And again, as Zach mentioned, if we can keep questions to clarifying questions about this proposal, please.
Again, if you have questions, please use the question answer chat window in Zoom.
Zach, we have a question. Could you please provide a timeline in regards to the duration of the closure?
Yeah, so we're not really setting a timeline on this closure. So it will be closed until further notice by the commission.
Okay, we have a couple more. The next one, do you have any study on the health of the bay already closed years ago? I'm assuming that's referring to the closures that we did in 2017.
So we don't have any studies directly specific to that closure, though we're relying on a number of studies that have looked at areas that have been either closed short-term or closed long-term to oyster harvest. So a great example of that in Texas is the Sabine Lake area. It's been closed to oyster harvest. It's really never been harvested for oysters. There's a number of studies that show that reef to be very healthy, or reef in that area to be very healthy and providing a number of ecosystem services.
This next question just says license fees and boat renewals. Just to clarify, that's this proposal has nothing to do with license fees or boat renewals. That's not involved in this proposal. The next question, do you have a set of metrics that would guide a decision to reopen the area in the future?
That's a great question. So given the reasoning behind this proposal, if you kind of saw on the some of our reasons behind the proposal. It's really just the value of the habitat in that area, and our observed increases in harvest effort in that area. And so I don't think currently anyway, the thinking is it would reopen after the number of oysters goes past a certain level. Really, this area is being closed just because of the value of habitat in that area. And that is its value as nursery habitat, kind of some of these other ecosystem services of oysters. So there's really not a metric, I don't think, that we would use to reopen that area.
Okay. The next one, is the TPWD currently involved with any oyster reef restoration projects? If so, who are the business partners involved with those efforts? Zach, do you want me to take that one?
Yeah.
Yes, TPWD is very involved in oyster restoration, and we've restored over 580 acres. However, that question's not very germane to this proposal. And so we'll just say yes. And for more information about oyster restoration, you can feel free to email me and I can talk to you more about that. The next question is, will there be compensation for the time of closure currently? I'm assuming that means, is there going to be compensation for fisheries harvest out of Mesquite if it's closed? The person, if you ask that and I summarize that incorrectly, please put that in the Q&A. But it seems to be is if you're asking if there's going to be compensation for fishermen from the closure from Mesquite.
No, there's currently no plans for that.
The next question. This closure looks like, is this closure based primarily on the data from 2021? Do you think you need more studies since this closure is a permanent stance?
This study is really based on this closure is really based on just the value of the habitat in that area. We talked about the different types of oyster reef, the diversity of habitats interspersed with the oyster reef. And so it's not really based on a study from 2021. It's based on kind of what we know about the value of nursery habitat and what sort of habitats are valuable as nursery habitat. And so I think those concepts are pretty well established in the literature.
I have two questions that are very similar, so I'm going to combine them. One is, will these bays be closed for sports fishing? And a similar question, is the closure for all saltwater fishing on other finfish or shrimpers other than just commercial oyster fishermen? And then if they are being closed for the sake of becoming a sanctuary, how does this make sense?
That's a good question. So no, they're not being closed to sport fishing or shrimping. And the primary reason for that is because we know oyster reef and oysters in general are kind of a unique organism in that not only are they an important fishery, they're important themselves as habitat for other oyster settlement, but also for other organisms that use oyster reefs as habitat. Also a number of different ecosystem services of those oyster reefs, such as erosion control and things like that. So so therefore the oyster fishery and management of the oyster fishery differs in that we really are trying to strike a balance between the importance of oysters economically, that is as a fishery organism, and also ecologically for a number of the ecosystem services that they play.
Okay. Next question, for the coastwide landings, did you count area 25 and area 29 or just area 28? I feel like there's more than 9.6% there.
That's a good question. That 9.6%, so with regards to TX29 and TX25, that is correcting so the idea there was we were trying to figure out what proportion of landings in TX29 and TX25 came from those subsets, the Ayres Bays subset of TX29 and the Ayres Bays subset of TX25. So we took the full landings for those respective harvest areas and corrected it based on the amount as a percentage of oyster reef found within the closure subset. So no, it's not for the full TX29 or full TX25. It's for the proportion of oyster habitat within the proposed closure area relative to that whole harvest area.
Okay. One question, as a supportive member of this proposal, I'm interested in what short-term and long-term results are anticipated, positive and negative.
Yeah. So, I mean, we anticipate that as we allow Oyster Reef to exist in the ecosystem, it'll continue to serve the roles that it's currently serving as nursery habitat. Also, we mentioned on the reasons for this proposal slide, the importance of that habitat in kind of buffering and protecting some of those other habitats from erosion. And so we really just anticipate a continuation of those services.
Okay. You mentioned this year there are areas that were overfished. Would this closure put more pressure on other reefs in the area?
That's a great point. Certainly when we close areas to harvest, there is a potential that that will concentrate fishing effort. And so for that reason, we have a number of different management strategies for trying to control and manage effort that we're looking into for fisheries management. Also, we'll continue to use the traffic light approach to determine when areas have reached that threshold for closure. And that's really the purpose of that program.
Next question, are there other states that have similar closures?
Yes, sanctuary reefs and sanctuary areas are pretty common in a lot of areas around the country, including a lot of areas on the East Coast and I believe throughout the Gulf as well.
Will commercial fishing restaurants and those who work in industries be greatly impacted by this closure?
So the estimate we have on that is what was shown in the presentation. About on average 9.6% of landings coastwide are coming from these areas that we're proposing closure of. So yes, there is certainly the potential for impact there.
Okay. Was the increase in harvest in Mesquite due to TPWD closing all other bay systems? And was there any scientific studies to prove that oyster harvesting from these three bays caused harm to the ecosystem?
That's a good question. So yeah, absolutely. As areas close, bays fishing will certainly concentrate. So like I said, we recognize that and are kind of looking into some other ways of managing that fishing effort. Though the point of the traffic light approach or stoplight approach is to halt harvest before it becomes damaging to that area. And the second part of that question, we really just have data that we collected throughout the harvest season this year, and you know, whether or not there was damage to those reefs during this oyster season. Really what the reason for this closure is just the value of that nursery habitat in those areas and us wanting to just conserve that going forward from future fishing effort.
Okay, we have an attendee asking who retrieves the samples and how often. I'm assuming they're asking about the samples that you presented here.
Yeah, so we presented results from two different sampling programs. The first sampling program was that routine dredge survey, and that's kind of more to get at bay-wide levels of oyster abundance and not specific to any one harvest area. To note, that routine program is not what we use to open and close areas to harvest. Samples, we go from 20 to 30 dredges per month for that routine sampling program. And that's conducted by Parks and Wildlife biologists. And then the targeted oyster sampling program, that's the program that we use specifically to look at whether or not an area needs to be opened or closed to commercial harvest. That is conducted just prior to and during the commercial oyster season. When we go out and sample is really based on the amount of fishing effort we're seeing in different harvest areas. I think that's it. Was that all of that question, Emma?
Yeah, I believe so. Next question. During the proposed area closure, will TPWD stop private lease owners from getting oysters from the public land?
I'm not sure I understand that.
I think that's asking if this will affect the private lease harvest, although it's asking from public land. The person who submitted that question during the proposed area closure, will TPWD stop private lease owners from getting oysters from the public land? If you want to clarify that question in the QA, that might help us answer it a little bit better. So I'm just going to pause on that one and go to the next one, and then we can come back to it. The next question is, when did this concern arise and why? I'm assuming the concern about harvest pressure in Mesquite. Was it because of increasing citations?
Yeah, so good question. So you saw on the graph that I provided earlier, we started to see some increased fishing pressure in 2017. That is a license year 2017 season. And then really this year, license year 2022 is when we saw our highest amount of fishing effort in this area. That was 145 boats, I believe, reporting landings in just the Mesquite Bay portion of the proposed closure area. So that's a fairly recent concern. Like I said in the beginning, we've not seen a lot of fishing effort in this area in years past. And so for that reason, this habitat really hasn't been subject to a lot of harvest or potential harvest. And so it was really the more recent increase in harvest that we observed that really made us think that this would be necessary to close this area.
Next question, is this discriminatory towards smaller boats such as skiffs who primarily work in these areas and cannot work in deeper water? I can't speak to whether or not a small boat can work in deep water, but
the closure is what it is. It's closed to oyster harvest. The proposal is to close it to oyster harvest.
Okay. Sorry, there's a lot in here. Excuse me while I catch up. Let me just try to read through this one. Why is this the first year that this reef is affected? Would you say the green light fault over the fishing on these areas? Why is this a problem now and it hasn't been before?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we saw really it's just the amount of effort we saw in this area in this year. And like I said, we did see high effort in 2017. And in 2017, there were a couple other permanent closures that occurred up and down the coast. Most in that particular year, the focus for this area anyway was primarily on St. Charles Bay, and the Mesquite Bay area did not get closed in that last round. But it was really just the increased harvest that we observed, or increased effort that we observed this year, that has resulted in our concern.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of more questions coming in about closing this area, increasing pressure in other areas. Zach, I feel like you've already addressed that in one of your previous answers. So I'm gonna kind of just clump those all in and start dismissing those, because we've already answered the question about this increasing pressure in other areas. Is there any thought about using other bays to replace this bay, such as TX 33, 34, 23? These remain open but do not get closed by TPWD and Keller Bay. Is that question, are we considering, Lisa, I think you asked that. I think I might be interpreting this wrong. Are you asking if we're considering closing any other bays? Right now, this proposal is just for Mesquite. We are not looking at closing any other areas under this proposal. 1 second.
I do want to be clear. I see a question about the harvest of sport harvest of oysters. So to be clear, this proposal and the other closures that occurred in 2017 of the 6 other harvest areas, this is for all oyster harvest, commercial and sport. It's not just commercial oyster harvest. So this proposal is to halt all oyster harvest in the proposed area.
And thank you, Lisa, for that clarification. She was asking if there's an option to trade out another closure area instead of this one. That's what that question was.
There's no conversation about that right now, but I mean, absolutely feel free to include that in your public comment.
Sorry, I'm still filtering through these. Some of these aren't necessarily clarifying questions, so give me a moment while I filter through these, sorry. There's some questions about out-of-state harvest. All harvest in this area would be prohibited. There's some questions about COVID skewing our data, the increased votes being because not very many were working during the last 2 years of COVID. Have we taken into account the decline in workforce during COVID years in our data analysis?
No, I mean, really what we're looking at here, what's relevant to the proposal is the fact that we've seen recent increase in harvest, and we just want to treat that. We want to just be careful with that. Yeah.
Can we specify what measures we will use to prevent overfishing in nearby areas if this closure happens? Zach, I believe you already answered about using the monitoring and closure in other areas as necessary. I'll let you re-answer that if you want to. So what measures we use to ensure increased pressure and overfishing doesn't happen in nearby areas?
Yeah, so we'll continue with our current traffic light approach of monitoring areas during the commercial oyster season to open and close those areas when they fall below or rise above a certain threshold. We're also just in general, as we're looking at some other alternative management ways of spreading effort out and kind of moving harvest out off of some of these wild reefs.
So again, we have some questions about out-of-state harvest. I'm going to dismiss that one. This will prohibit any harvest from in-state or out-of-state. So why can sport fishermen harvest 2 sacks of oysters in closed areas?
Yeah, I already addressed that one, Emma.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, pretty much just to reiterate, the closure is relevant to both sport and commercial oyster harvest. So there's no sport or commercial oyster harvest in the proposal.
Okay. There's a question about VMS. This proposal has nothing to do with VMS. This is just about the closure in Mesquite. There's a question about who is supporting these closures. I guess we will find out after these public meetings and we get all of the public comments submitted, then we will know. There's a question, if these bays are closed, will the reefs grow in size?
That's a great question. We believe that the reef health and abundance of oysters will increase or just maintain, and really that's the aim of this proposal, is just to protect the oyster habitat in those areas, not necessarily that it would grow and expand, but really we're just looking to protect the oyster habitat in those areas.
Although, to note, oysters are biogenic, so when they're not harvested, they produce their own habitat. So the more live oysters there are, the larger the habitat it will grow, because they will produce, and then the spat will settle on their own substrate, their own shells become oyster reef, and so you would expect potentially some vertical growth. I just got clarification. I just realized, sorry, there was one person who asked this question, a different person who gave the clarification. So that one question we were confused about: during the proposed area closure, will TPWD stop private lease owners from getting oysters from public lands? It sounds like that question was specifically about riparian rights. The question is, would private landowners be able to harvest riparian rights during this closure? I believe that was the clarification for that question.
That's a great question. Emma, do you have an answer to that?
Sorry, I was looking at the questions. I believe that this closure would pertain to all natural oyster beds in that area. We would have to look into the code on that to confirm that. And so if you have that question that's outstanding, please email the CFISH email address that is up there. And we'll try to get an official answer on that question and get that back to you. Question, there was a mention that other states have implemented this type of closure. What has been the success? Will this proposal be measured in like fashion? So I guess you're asking if we are going to measure the efficiency of this proposal in terms of restoring reefs.
We'll continue to monitor the Mesquite Bay area as part of our routine monitoring, yes.
Do you know the average depth of reefs in these areas?
Man, well, like I said, they span from intertidal, which is, depth 0, all the way out to probably 2 meters of water, about.
Okay, I'm not seeing, I'm gonna pause for a second because it's just been a barrage of questions. So pause for a second to see if any more come in. There were a couple of comments. If you guys made comments, we're not addressing them live. We're just capturing comments. If you have comments to make, please submit them as it's outlined on the screen right there. We're just kind of dismissing the comments in the question and answer box because we're just doing questions right now. Are there documents that explain our targeted oyster dredge sampling program and the traffic light approach? This proposal doesn't have anything to do with the traffic light approach, but if you need more information about our dredge program, that data, that monitoring data is what we use to inform this decision. So Zach, do you want to address if there are documents that explain the sampling program and where?
Yeah, I mean, we have those procedures written out, and like Emma said, just please email the CFISH web email address and we can get you more information on how to access those.
Okay. There's some questions about oyster ecology and how oysters grow in shallow water. Those aren't particularly germane to this proposal. I think they're being dismissed. There's a question about, do you have any data for the already closed? Oh, wait, sorry, we already answered that question. My apologies. If we've already been monitoring the previously closed areas. And Zach already answered that. How quickly will it take for TPWD to make a decision on the proposal?
So the first opportunity that the commission will have to make a decision on this is at the March commission meeting. So March 24th will be their opportunity to make a decision.
This was a 3-month season. What are you foreseeing for next season with all of these additional closures? I think that maybe goes beyond the scope of this proposal, but Zach, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, the length of a season really is related to abundance of oysters in our bays in a given year. As you know, that has a lot to do with environmental conditions going into a season. It also has a lot to do with the amount of effort, and we're seeing more and more effort in some areas of our bay. So, I can't really say how long the season will be next year.
Is the proposal permanent or does it have a sunset provision?
There is no sunset provision.
There's a question if the commission will sit down with the stakeholders and try to come up with a compromise. Zach, do you kind of just want to describe the commission process in general and how public comment is taken into account? Just to understand the
Yeah,
process.
that's kind of the point of the public comment, and certainly the commission has the ability to take any suggestions that may come through the public hearing. That's kind of the point of the public comment period. So I encourage you to include any sort of alternative proposals or changes to the proposal that you have along with your public comment. And again, the public comments need to be submitted to one of the options that we'll give you. I think you can see those on your screen still at our online public comment interface, email or phone. These questions are not considered public comment. So please, if you want to provide formal public comment, please do so through the online portal, email, or via phone, or in person at one of our public hearings on Thursday.
Would this proposal prevent the establishment of off-bottom oyster farms in the closed area?
Yes, currently we are not allowing off-bottom oyster farms in any closed area such as this.
There's a question about House Bill 51 closures. They're saying it's pertinent because of the closing of the bays, but this is a different type of closure entirely than anything that has anything to do with House Bill 51 or targeted oyster sampling. So different closure, different proposal. Any questions about future decisions we make aren't really relevant to this proposal? What we may or may not close in the future after this? I'm getting a couple of those coming through, and really the question and answer for this needs to focus specifically on the Mesquite, the proposed closure for this for Mesquite Carlos. When did we start to study these bays? When our sampling program started, Zach? 70s?
Well, the dredge program, the routine dredge program started in the 80s, and then our targeted oyster sampling program started in the 2010s, so about 2013, I think was the first year we started doing targeted oyster sampling. And that is specifically sampling that's relevant to opening and closing areas to harvest.
I'm not seeing, there are a couple of questions in there, but they're not asking for clarification on this proposal at this time. A couple about House Bill 51. That is not a clarifying question. And I see some of you are getting your questions answered in the text, so that's good. Currently, this proposal has no component associated with VMS. VMS to ensure people are not harvesting in closed areas is not part of this proposal. Sorry, I answered that question without saying what the question was. There have been several questions about VMS, vessel monitoring systems, and that's not being proposed as part of this proposal. Will this video be available to see online later? For future meetings open to comment, can you please have a Spanish speaking representative? I don't know if we do we post these?
That's a Holly question.
Holly?
Yeah, this video will be uploaded to our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow. The link that you'll be getting in your follow-up email from Zoom will provide you with a link to that channel. It's not our main Parks and Wildlife YouTube channel. It's our education page where this is going to be posted. So again, that link will be in your follow-up email from Zoom tomorrow. And as far as Spanish speaking, that's not going to be uploaded right now at this time, especially for our online webinars.
I apologize. I do see one question written in Spanish. If you want to email that question to Seafish, the email address that you see there, we can get that with one of our translators in the department and they can answer that directly. So sorry that we don't speak Spanish, but we can get you to somebody who does. Okay, some of these are written of questions that have been already asked, so I'm dismissing them. Or comments that have already been made. So does anybody else have any clarifying questions about this proposal? I'm seeing a lot of questions or comments come through that are not directly clarifying. So we're limiting these because we're running out of time. We're limiting these to questions specifically about this proposal. Oh, noted that there's a request to have a Spanish speaking, a translator at the Galveston meeting. So we'll discuss whether that's an option. Thank you for that comment. Yes, I believe we do. Sorry, will comments be accepted in Spanish? Yes, I do believe we do accept comments in Spanish and have them translated, right, Holly?
I can speak directly to that one. If we do receive comments in Spanish, we do translate those and those become part of the official public record. So we are able to accept those comments in Spanish and translate them so that they can be part of the rest of the public record and be easily understood by the commissioners.
Sorry, we're not taking any more questions about the traffic light approach. The traffic light approach has nothing to do with this proposal. We have a couple more of those coming through. Again, this proposal is specifically to close the Mesquite Ayres Carlos complex. Again, does anybody have clarifying questions about what this proposal does or does not entail?
I do want to encourage if folks have comments about, other management strategies that you think are causing some of or the result of some of these closures, please include that in your comments. That's something you can absolutely include in comments. That is your formal public comment.
And just to clarify, we've gotten a broad range of comments about, why isn't this associated with this? Just there are a lot of things that go into oyster health in a bay system, you know, salinity and fresh water and all of that. And so there's a very broad universe of things that apply. But again, we're taking questions that are to clarify what is being proposed here. Will the proposed sanctuary, if passed, increase the amount of potential stat set in the outlining areas?
Yeah, so it's thought that oyster sanctuaries, that's one of the main purposes, is to provide a source of seed oysters for surrounding areas. So yes, that's absolutely possible, and we believe it will happen.
More questions about the traffic light. Again, the traffic light approach is completely independent of this proposal. It was not used for this proposal, and this proposal is completely different than that.
But again, you're free to include any of those thoughts in your public comment when you submit them.
Any other questions?
So since the questions are kind of slowing down a little bit, obviously you still have time to put your questions into the Q&A for us, but I do just want to again make a note that you will be receiving another email from Zoom with this contact information. Please feel free to provide your public comment through our portal or through email or through our phone number that's also listed on the slide that's up right now.
We have another question that's a little bit redundant of previous ones that you've answered, but the first part of it is that, are the existing minor bay closures that set a precedence for this closure still closed? And yes, they are still closed. And then have we seen any positive benefits there? Zach's answered that one already, I believe.
Yeah, the email for public comments, you should be able to see it on the screen. The cfish@tpw.texas.gov.
There's a question about if there's evidence showing that closing areas permanently will guarantee that oyster populations will grow back. Specifically asking about samples from Christmas Bay and Karankawa to show how it works. And Zach's already kind of addressed any monitoring that we're doing in Christmas Bay or Karankawa or any of the previously closed But it just to take a moment to mention that there are several areas like this in other states in the country that have had monitoring and shown that sanctuary status or that closure does benefit the oyster population. Okay, so we're at the 7 o'clock hour. So Zach, I'm not sure, and the questions have died down. A lot of them are kind of restating questions that were earlier asked. If you guys, we had a couple of people manning the question and answer. So some people were typing answers, some people were answering. So if you guys have any additional questions that we didn't get to, please feel free to email us at that CFISH email address right there. But we are getting fewer and fewer questions at this time. So Zach, I don't know if you want to wrap things up.
Yeah, that's fine. And if there's ever any other questions, you can use the cfish at tpw.texas.gov email address as well. And so I'll turn it back over to Holly to finish up.
Yeah, and just like I just mentioned, you'll be getting that email from Zoom tomorrow, and we will be uploading this recording from this evening up to our YouTube account as well. So keep an eye on that. You can check that out through either by visiting that channel directly through the link that will be sent in your email, or you can find it on Facebook as well, and that'll be on our Coastal Fisheries Facebook page, which is, I believe, TPWD Coastal. So with that, I think we are ready to head out. Thank you guys again for joining us this evening, and thank you to all of our Parks and Wildlife panelists for coming out as well.